Hello all, the Irrational Skeptic here, and today I am going to be doing a video that's a bit different than my usual MBTI content, although it is tangentially related, as I have come to find that even certain types have an inclination towards one thing or the other. To varying degrees, everyone is ignorant of something, right? For example, if one were on the path to enlightenment, they may be ignorant of their spouse needing some attention from them. If one were to decide to completely sublimate the world around them, this would necessarily include those whom they purport to care about. Is this not characteristically a selfish activity? Yes, they are looking to be free of the bondage of the external world, but at the expense of no longer interacting within it in ways that may pragmatically assist others. Now, we could make the argument that by withdrawing themselves from the world, they are neither contributing to good or bad in the world. Since they have decided to somewhat isolate themselves, they are confining their circle of influence to the borders of their body and maybe a round carpet. This small area of action could be said to be of neutral influence upon the world. But what if such a person is a married man or woman? Would we still look up to them as they ignored their children, wife, or husband in search of what they deemed to be freedom from external affairs? This could be the beginning of ignorance and not any such a thing as enlightenment. His wife may be asking to get the sink fixed, and he is busy levitating his consciousness into the stratosphere. The kids may just want to play, but no, he has no more time for childish games. Pun intended. A way around this could be to say that this man is in search of a particular treasure, which when he attains, he can bring back the proceeds to his family, friends, and anyone he interacts with. Yes, then this goal would then be a noble one, should he achieve it, of course. On the other hand, is it really worth it? If we add together the time of neglect to one's surroundings and subtract this number from the benefits he brings back, would it be a positive number? I'm not exactly sure how this math would add up because to some extent, what he may come back with may not be of interest to others. In this case, this treasure, quote unquote, has no real value. Therefore, when we do the math, we are going to certainly wound up with a negative number. We could then say that this newly enlightened man or woman was ignorant. He did not see what was important. He or she did not see what was right in front of their eyes. Now, what is the relationship to someone we deem to be completely ignorant? A person that drinks alcohol every night and parties every other day. They don't have a care in the world and don't care how many people they hurt on their path to pain and pleasure. These behaviors I've described are not even necessarily an ignorant person and could be more described to be a reckless person. Someone can be ignorant and not reckless. So it is not fair of me to characterize the best version of an ignorant person as one who is acting in objectively antisocial ways. Someone who is not cooperative. But what I did for the person heading to enlightenment was exactly the same extreme. It is not necessary that someone on that path must negate all their earthly responsibility. I believe this quote encompasses the ideal version of an enlightened person who does not totally sacrifice the outer world for their newfound bliss. The quote goes like this: before enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. After enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. This saying helps us to understand that life is and should be complete. We shouldn't negate worldly responsibilities in favor of running to a sacred sanctuary. Yes, we should still try to attain this state while at the same time attending to our family, friends, and work. This would be a true master. On the other hand, I will try to characterize the ignorant individual, whom we can argue is just everyone that is not enlightened. In this case, I can say that she is a good family woman, does her work excellently, and is part of many charities. She is what we can all call an example which we would want our children to follow. She takes care of her children and shows that motherly love to all inhabitants of the earth itself. The only thing she lacks is finding this inner sanctuary. She believes that all things spiritual are not to be bothered with. Her religion is being a good woman, mother, wife, and human. Anything outside of that she sees as either a waste of time or a bastardization of morality. She is strictly materialistic, although she does have the care of someone who looks like an angel. In the way that I have characterized the examples I've given, you see how all of this is moving along a spectrum. There is, however, a distinction to make when it comes to finding this inner sanctuary versus not finding it. This is the distinction between ignorance and enlightenment. If you are following, you would also find that in either camp we can have someone who is ignorant. Instead of carry water, chop wood, the ignorant enlightened individuals just stop at quote unquote enlightened. For the materialistic individual, they carry water, chop wood up until the point of enlightenment and then stop. I hope this prose has given you a good idea, or I hope this prose has given you an idea of what I'm trying to paint. I am trying to paint the relationship between enlightenment and ignorance. Now, let's try and tie this all into what I said earlier about this having anything to do with the MBTI. Well, first of all, the main distinctions that Jung makes in his book Psychological Types are introversion and extroversion. He sees that all humans do have what would be called an inner world versus an external world, and that each human being does have a part of them that sees itself from distinct from the world, Yet there is another part of us that sees ourselves as attached and part of the world. And in this, he was trying to characterize the attitudes of extroversion, where you have people with particular functions marrying themselves into the world and not making much of a distinction between what they do and what the world is. And then there are the introverts who see a huge distinction between who the world is, they, and themselves, who I is, in a sense. And even though everyone has this strong sense of I, we have it to differing degrees. And to those differing degrees is what we would tend to call the attitude that one has. So what does this have to do with the whole spiel I had before now? Well, let's just take a couple of examples. Let's take introverted thinking versus extroverted thinking. An extroverted thinker, dominant, would likely be acting in a world as to increasingly have impact and change upon the world. It is a pragmatic function that seeks to make a physical or external. It doesn't have to necessarily be physical, but it has to be external, in which sense it is physical anyways. So it's aiming to make some sort of change in the world whereby others see this change and see that this change is good. They are not making a distinction, for example, between their success in attaining power, vehicles, in ordering the house and putting all the things in the right manner for things to be effective, and use the least resources to gain the maximum output. They are in a way acting on a law of nature and a law of conservation. They are trying to be efficient as possible while getting as much as possible out of what they do. In relation to someone that we would call ignorant, an introverted thinker, on the other hand, would try to look at a situation and divorce themselves from the situation. They would then try to explain what is happening logically. They would use deductive logic most of the time to come to certain conclusions about the world. The key word here is about. What the introverted thinker is talking about, the extroverted thinker is doing. There is no space between what the extroverted thinker is doing and what is being done. This is theoretical, of course. Of course, people do see that they have done something and they make the distinction that, hey, I did that and I made that happen, and I'm a separate person. Everyone has that normal common sense distinction. What we are talking about here is the functions themselves, or the functional attitudes themselves. And this means that when the extroverted thinking archetype does something, it is doing those things in and for those things themselves. Those external manifestations are the reason and the means. They're the means and the end. And the same goes for the introverted thinker, but in another fashion, because they are enclosing themselves, they are shrinking themselves as to shrink the space around them. They would like to be but a point a point of action, a point of potential action, but never exuding that influence upon the world. And so when you go to my example earlier of the man who is sitting on a carpet surrounding him and trying to withdraw from the world, you can see where I was heading with that line of thinking in regards to type. The introverted thinker is now shrinking themselves and then rendering judgments upon the world according to everything that is not themselves. And when we are able to shrink ourselves so far and to so little a point, then we see everything as quote unquote trying to attack us. In the case of the introverted thinker, what they see as trying to attack them is extroverted feeling. It's the opposing attitude. So it's not necessarily going to be extroverted thinking that they see trying to oppose them. Though we have to come to understand that the inferior function is said to be the door to the unconscious. It is supposed to be primarily attached to the unconscious and then having like a little point sticking out in the conscious realm that gives it a flavor or a conscious being. So it is akin to an iceberg, which has most of its power from the bottom of the ocean being attached to the bottom and climbing all the way up and having a little point sticking out. When the Titanic was sailing in the sea and crashed into that iceberg, it looked like a normal piece of ice that it could probably just climb over, like all the other sheets of ice on the ocean. But not knowing how much powerful influence it had from underneath the ocean, they were not able to see that this tiny point sticking out carried tremendous energy. So, what does this have to do with, for example, the introverted thinker that I just mentioned? Well, let's take the INTP. They have introverted thinking as a dominant function, extroverted intuition as a secondary, introverted sensing as a tertiary, and extroverted feeling as the inferior. If this is the door to the unconscious, then what is in the unconscious? This is when we have to introduce the 8 cognitive function stack. We have to include on the other side of the moon extroverted thinking, introverted intuition, extroverted sensing, and introverted feeling. This is supposed to be an unknown world to the INTP. This is supposed to be a world where if they were to take this attitude, they would really not be feeling like themselves. They could not act in this mode for long periods of time without bouncing back to their normal sense of, I am an introverted thinker and I must subject everything to logic. I must parse everything through my subjective logic, which is, if you see my other videos, not actually subjective, it is objective. Because what they try to deduce are things they consider to be laws, things they consider to be eternal truths. In this sense, Einstein formulated his theory of relativity, and he did not believe that his theory of relativity only worked on Earth or in his house. He believed that it works all over the universe. He went so far into reducing himself to a speck that he started to describe the external in totality. So let's do the example of an extroverted thinker. Let's take the ENTJ as an example, who would have extroverted thinking as a dominant, introverted intuition as a secondary, extroverted sensing as a tertiary, and introverted feeling as an inferior function. As they go about doing things in the external world, extroverted thinking, they are at the end of the spectrum where they are married to their influence upon the world. And the other side of the coin, or the door to the other side of the coin, is introverted feeling. This is their own sense of being, their own sense of moral duty. So when they see this little piece of the iceberg sticking out, they only circumscribe what they believe to be their moral duty to very fixed and small points. It cannot be in the, it has to be in the service of extroverted thinking goals. And when you get into their unconscious, you do quite the opposite. You go to what I described to be the INTP. So they have the opposite of extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, the opposite of introverted intuition, extroverted intuition, the opposite of introverted sensing, the opposite of extroverted sensing, introverted sensing, and the opposite of introverted feeling, extroverted feeling. And going down into these last four functions which exist in the unconscious, we get to the other side of the world. We get to the other side of the spectrum, whereby I was describing between the ignorant and the enlightened. It's not a coincidence that there's an I and an E there, but no relation to introversion versus extroversion. Introverted individuals are not ignorant, and extroverted individuals are not necessarily enlightened. But what I am saying here is that in order to truly live in a sense where you can, after enlightenment, carry water, chop wood, before enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. In order to get to that point, we have to sacrifice. This is important. We have to sacrifice what we deem to be the dominating influence in our lives. We do have to come to some sort of middle point through which we can assess the outside, assess the internal world, and combine this into a harmonious whole. And this was the point I was just trying to elaborate on when I mentioned earlier that this is somehow related to type. So I hope that gives a little bit of an idea what I'm trying to get at. I will probably do future videos where I go deeper into this subject. I can do the different functions, sensing, of course, feeling, and intuition. So those are whole other ball games, which I did not use in this example, but just giving you some things to think about. I hope I have shown that although there is a spectrum, there does come a point or a limit where one is one and the other is the other. In order to live fully, I believe that both are needed. Well, thanks for listening. I am actually working on a fictional book. I am still not settled on the title, but as of now it is called The Art of Art. This is subject to change. As usual, please support my channel by going into the description and donating in the PayPal link. I am also working on an MBTI inventory, which should allow me to produce a reliable test for individuals who are finding it hard to pin down their type. Also, I will soon be offering a service where I can do a live video call over Skype or Zoom or whichever chatting interface of choice, which should give me more time with you to figure out your type for sure. I have my own method, which I use to nail it down. In future videos, I will try to be more open about these methods, but mainly I'll say that I will type using intuition, rather introverted intuition, and I usually do get a good sense or feel of what someone's type is just by having a conversation with them. Before they even write the test, I can give them one or a top 3 likely options, with 1 being the most likely. And as I have come to find over time, is that I actually usually get that person's type before they take the test. But anyways, thanks for watching, and until we see next time, the Irrational Skeptic signing off.